Hi, I'm Anna Marie Cox, and this podcast is a labor of many years in a dark sea of centuries, where nothing seems to flow, where a lifetime is only a brief eddy, even for the person who lifts it.
Get over yourself, Anna. Good God.
This podcast is like an illuminated manuscript, Dan.
Oh,
and along the sides are very intricate depictions and descriptions of my office.
I love the idea of this podcast as a Talmud, as a Talmudic chapter. That works really well. Hi, I'm Daniel Dresner, and I am willing to listen to good thoughts, especially if they come from a dog.
Oh, and dogs have nothing but good thoughts. If you mean like positive, really.
Yes.
Like, I mean, they don't. Yeah. Welcome to Space the Nation, where we look at science fiction through the lens of
cargo cult science
and soteriology.
Now, what is soteriology? That's a new word for me, Anna.
It is the study of salvation, of how one is saved, which is a super applicable thing to what we are discussing, which is a Canticle for Leibowitz, which is available at bookstores. And you put in the script also online. And Dan, it is not. It is not available on Kindle, which is, of course,
that is amusing in so many ways. Yes.
Now, it has been scanned and is available in PDF form various places, although I couldn't find it for free. But I believe it is downloadable from like Gutenberg Project and whatnot. So that's good, I guess. But also, just ironic is not quite the right word. But anyway, we'll move on. We are going to be
funny, which is consistent with this book.
Are we doing Avengers before we're doing Deadpool and Wolverine?
No, we're going to do Deadpool and Wolverine first because that's.
But I want to ask you why, because you fucked up.
It's because this came out. Okay. Yes, you're right. Start over. Do this sentence again. You can say I fucked up, but like now that I know it's coming, yeah.
Okay. In the next few weeks, we will be talking about Deadpool and Wolverine, and then I don't know why then. We have been doing this in order, and then we're going to talk about Captain America: Civil War. We've been doing like crossovers kind of in order, but Dan, did you screw up the schedule?
I did screw up the schedule, Anna. This is all on me. I fucked it up.
There we go.
And in fact, we're not going to be doing
music to my ears.
We're not doing either Twister or Twisters now because we just don't have time to, given what else is coming out. But yes, for some reason, when I set up the schedule, the release dates were maybe changed since I did it. I don't know, but I do apologize. So yes,
right. No, I'm usually the one who screws things up. So nothing on Dan. Also, I think I might go see Twisters, and maybe if you go see it too, and we could do a special episode.
Yeah. Okay.
Much like we just did a special episode.
Yes, of The Dead Zone. David Cronenberg's version of The Dead Zone, which seemed, let's say, topical, given current events.
Callously capitalize on a recent presidential assassination attempt. And speaking of presidential changes, we also just did a special episode about Joe Biden dropping out of the race, which at this point, when you hear this, will be a week old, and I'm sure lots will have happened. But if you want to see an unedited version of Dan and I chatting about current events, we may do that more often.
We could.
And those will be available. Our current events chats, we are going to make available to everyone, not just patrons. But if you become a patron, there are some special benefits.
There are. If you become a patron, you get early access to our regular podcast episodes. You also get access to our patrons only episodes, like The Dead Zone. You get access to our monthly AUAs. You also get access, perhaps most importantly, to our pretty awesome Discord channel, which I'm sure is a flutter right now, actually.
It's hopping right now, I'll tell you.
This campaign.
Yep.
I can imagine. But it actually, that is one of its virtues, which is it's a pretty nice place to talk about politics, some good conversations, and not nasty.
And other stuff. Yeah, it is a very supportive and cool place to be. Yeah. Not that Dan comes around very often. He is the divorce dad of the Discord. And also, Dan, did you mention I was kind of spacing out while you talked? So did you mention you don't get ads?
No, I did not. So one of the primary virtue of becoming a patron is that if you were not a patron, the ads you heard at the start of this episode that you will hear at the end and in the middle go away because patrons get to listen to this episode's ad.
All right, and Dan, I knew that was your plan all along. I knew you wanted ads. you man who has not rejected capitalism yet.
Doubt is a powerful tool, Anna, and perhaps it should be applied to skepticism and or enthusiasm for advertisements. That's all I'll say.
I like how you worked that. That was good, Dad. That was good. I think I just called you Dad.
Did you like?
All right.
Yes.
Why
you did just call me
we
Dad,
talking about just a slip? My own dad is far more distant than you are. So no, it's kidding. It's kidding. He's just literally in Atlanta, and we don't talk a ton because of all the reasons that people don't talk sometimes. None of them, my dad's wonderful. We'll just stop there. My dad is wonderful.
Yeah. Dads are wonderful.
Yeah, I love him very much. But why are we talking about a canticle for Leibowitz, Dan?
So the reason we're talking about this, Anna, is, for lack of a way of putting it, counterprogramming. So we are in the middle of hot sci-fi summer. We've been doing crossover episodes. We've been doing big, dumb summer movie releases. I would think it's safe to say both of us were feeling a little stupid. And, we kind of thought, what is the opposite of a hot sci-fi summer episode? And I think it's a good, canon fodder book episode. And this is definitely within the canon. I mean, one of the things, if you ever start reading about Canticle for Leibowitz, it's all about how, hey, it was a sci-fi book that broke into the mainstream. It's treated as a work of serious literature. So it seemed ripe for
kind of literally about canon too.
Yeah. It is. It's about the creation of canon. That's true. Yeah, absolutely.
It's about the creation of canon, and punningly also about canon fodder.
Yes. Yeah. So that gets to the. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, this is so much counterprogramming. This is directly opposed to big dumb stuff. It's big, but it is weighty. And
it's weighty. I'm not. Let me put it this way:
It's a lot.
We laugh about big dumb stuff. There's big dumb stuff that's very smart. I don't know how smart this is, and this is one of the things we're going to talk about. This was, this is.
Yeah. I agree.
Weighty, but I'm not. Well, we'll see whether it's canon or fodder, I guess.
Yeah.
So this raises the obvious question: will this podcast ruin it for you? My answer is it will not ruin it for you any more than actually reading it, in the sense of this is an extremely depressing book. I don't think it's bad, to be clear. I mean, we can debate whether it belongs in the canon or not. It earns the depression. It's a well-written book. There are some passages that really hit you hard, but it is a heavy book.
Yeah, and we'll get into this in some unfortunate detail, but as someone who lives with depression, it was hard to read in some ways. It is not just depressing and it's a sad book.
Right.
It's bleak. And it was written by a depressed person.
Yes.
And it will be ruined for you if you believe something else besides humanity is stuck in a cycle of enlightenment and destruction. If that comes as a surprise to you don't believe that, then you might be.
Here's the spoiler alert: the world ends more than once. That's the way I would put it.
All right.
Yeah.
So
we should talk about previous experience, because this is a canonical book, but neither of us had ever read it before, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard about it for years.
Oh, sure.
And years.
And
it is a Hugo award-winning book, and it is, I mean, if I looked up, writing about it, and there's tons of writing about it, like theses and scholarly articles and personal essays, and there are a lot of people who really love this book and who really find it very important. I would say I think I understand its importance more than the love for it.
Yeah, love is a strong word for this book. This is actually one of the books, I've had students write papers about this book, and My End of the World. This is one of the books, the novels they can read for the End of the World class, where they say whether or not.
You still hadn't read it. That's interesting.
I assigned a lot of books on it. I couldn't read all of them, but I'm slowly getting to them, which is nice. So now I've got this one off the list.
I wish I'd known that hack in grad school.
Well, you've heard the phrase. You've heard the phrase, Anna, I'm sure the academic phrase of read something. I haven't assigned it yet. How could I have read it? Like, very often we assign stuff in order to force us as professors to actually read it.
Or not read it unless you have to read it for your podcast.
Exactly.
So I also will say that this book, I saw more recommendations for it after I started to talk about my own faith more publicly, because I am a later in life convert to Christianity, not Catholicism, unlike our vice presidential nominee. But I am a Christian, and it is the end of the world. So I guess people thought I'd be interested. I'm glad I read it. It's a tough book.
It is no, let's put it this way. I've read it. I suspect I will never read it again, is the way I would put it. So I'm glad we're talking about it now.
Yeah.
But we should, part of the, how to put this, let's get to the story behind the story, which I think is potentially as depressing as the story itself. Although, maybe I'm wrong. This Walter Miller Jr. character, Anna, sounds like a fun guy, Or am I wrong?
So I think a formative event, this is not his life story, but a formative event for him, and especially relevant to the novel, is that he was an Army Air Force gunner who took part in the bombing of the Monte Cassino monastery in Italy. And just a little backstory on that, because it's directly relevant for him and for the book. It was the very first monastery of the Benedictine order, founded by Saint Benedict himself in 530. And that is where he wrote a series of short essays that became the Rule of Saint Benedict, which is considered one of the founding documents of modern Catholicism. It is half spiritual principles of monasticism and half administrative guidelines for running an ascetic community, which I find that division, the equal importance of those two things, to be very appropriate to this story.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It is because it's the spiritual principles of salvation and dedication to the life of Christ and a life like that of Christ. And then how do we get along? How do we in this? And I'm serious, like that's what it's about.
But yeah, that's practical stuff. Yeah, that's important.
Yeah. How do you manage the politics? How do you manage a situation when someone goes against the rules of your small community? And I also think this is thematically important, which is the Benedictine order is independently run for the most part from Rome. It has no official representative, or has a official representative, but it's mainly like emergency oversight. And also every Benedictine order or every Benedictine monastery is considered independent. So it's a loose affiliation of states, as it were.
This is actually very enlightening for me, because I have to say, as someone who's Jewish, the idea of there like being any sort of autonomy within Catholicism is a really weird concept. Like, it's not, we always thought of, like there's Catholicism and the Communist Party. Those are the two like truly Leninist top-down structures. So this is worthwhile to know.
Yeah. So and it is interesting within the context of this book that this order is not Benedictine. It's Leibowitzian, I guess.
Yeah.
But it is run somewhat like a Benedictine order. So I watched a British propaganda newsreel about the bombing of Monte Cassino Monastery. Monte Cassino Monastery, and it is brutal.
You weren't persuaded?
Well, they made it to persuade people. There's an interview with a Catholic abbot at the very beginning where he says, if its preservation would have meant the prolonging of the war, our military leaders had no choice.
No.
Its destruction was justified. And it gets into the fact that there were leaflets dropped, Dan. Hey, they dropped leaflets. They dropped leaflets telling people that they were going to bomb it.
Folks were warned.
And it is true that the Nazis were using it to store munitions and also as an observation post. So they dropped leaflets. The next day, they bombed it every 20 minutes.
Jesus.
And it was, you can watch the video. It was devastating. It was gone. It's gone.
Yeah.
And it's been rebuilt, but it was gone. And then also an investigation afterwards showed that no Germans were present in the abbey, but 230 Italian civilians died. Having taken refuge, again, appropriate to this book.
Yes, very much so.
And here's a fun fact. Following the bombing, the ruins of the monastery were occupied by Germans again. because ruins provided excellent defensive cover.
Oh, okay.
All right, so back to Miller. After the war, he got a degree in engineering from UT Austin and then converted to Catholicism in 1947. And then had kind of a weird up and down relationship with the religion. His wife got a tubal ligation, which is not very Catholic. He got divorced. He lived with another woman. And then got back together with his wife. And as he said, inevitably maneuvered my way back into the church, although it was an on again, off again thing. Finally, I suppose I tried to define myself in that area by writing Leibowitz. I went back to the church. It never really took. As I said, it won a Hugo Award in 1961. After the success of Canticle for Leibowitz, he ceased publishing and he shot himself shortly after his wife died in 1996.
He did, I just want to be clear though, he did, to be fair, I think he edited another book about like sort of post-apocalyptic literature. And also he apparently
wrote a sequel.
Yeah, and he wrote a sequel which was like 90% done and then like tasked another sci-fi writer to complete it. It came out, I think, after posthumously, and I don't think it was terribly well reviewed, if memory serves. But
yeah, let's just move on. I don't like that story.
Sure. No, that's not good. Although I will say, none of that is surprising given what we read in this book. But let's get to
one thing is surprising.
Yes.
Is the debate about euthanasia and suicide that occurs in the last part.
Interesting. Yes. Okay, we'll get to that.
Suicide is a mortal sin.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. Yeah. Woohoo!
Chekhov's What's It? This is the thing that often appears in the first act of the book that winds up being somewhat relevant in the third act. Anna, what do you got?
Oh, Chekhov's, I guess memorabilia is a little too wide, but Chekhov's brother Francis.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Chekhov's arrow in the head.
Chekhov's Wanderer. I mean, there's...
There you go. And there's a lot. Thematically, he picks up a lot of threads.
Yep, and I have Chekhov's nuclear war, because,
Well, okay.
All right, let's get to the plot. Now, just a reminder, because this is a book, we do it slightly differently. Was it The Gone World that broke me in terms of plot recaps for novels?
Yeah, The Gone World. The one that we needed a chart to do the plot that I found like someone else had been broken by it and tried to construct like a timeline of it.
Yeah.
One of our favorite books.
All right, so
I will remind people, Emily Blunt in an adaptation by Denis Villeneuve. That is our best idea that we've ever had.
It's true. It's true. All right, but let's do what the jacket blurb might say. In the 1960s, a nuclear war broke out because someone thought they could win in a first strike. This led to the simplification in which survivors blamed the elites as responsible for starting World War III. All learning was considered suspect and illiteracy was embraced. One surviving engineer, one Isaac Edward Leibowitz, becomes a booklegger after joining a monastery, collecting and secreting books to create a storehouse of human civilization. The church allows Leibowitz to start a new monastic order dedicated to this purpose in New Mexico. Second part of this book flash forwards 600 years as the world seems to be exiting a dark age. Thon Tadeo, the Einstein of his time, travels to the abbey to study the archives. Once there, he sees that Brother Kornhauer has devised the means of creating artificial light. Tadeo studies the memorabilia and makes several major rediscoveries. He also takes action to ensure that his brother, the ruler of Texarkana, does not use the abbey as a fort for his expansion plans. The final part of the book takes place 600 years after that, in which mankind has advanced to the point of interstellar travel. Two superpowers, the Asian Coalition and the Atlantic Confederacy, are gearing up for war with nukes in space. Nuclear test demonstrations take place, and there's a very fragile ceasefire. The church orders Abbot Zerke... No, sorry, Karen. The church orders Abbot Zerke to enact a war contingency, which means a plan to send the memorabilia and a large crew up into space while the ceasefire still holds. On Earth, the abbot has a battle of wills with a doctor about euthanasia. That soon becomes a moot point, however, as yet another nuclear war breaks out just as the spaceship departs. Anna, does that about sum it up? That was a horrible book jacket, just to be clear, but it was hard. It would have been hard to do.
But
it was long, yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It is hard to do justice. This has both a lot of plot. No, it's not a lot of plot. It has a lot of details, but not much of a plot.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. There's very little action
Latin.
would be the way to put it. But there's a lot of like, there is some world building. That would be the way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of important that we only find out the monks have made it off Earth at the very, very, very end.
Right.
And because I fully expected that to not work out, given the
Given
general
the
tone of the book.
Yeah. Although, in some way,
expected super bleak, super bleak ending.
I mean, first of all, I would say the ending is super bleak regardless.
Oh,
but the other thing that I couldn't quite figure out, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, there were already colonies in space by the time that spaceship launches. It wasn't like there was nothing out there already.
I would say, but without the memorabilia, without like this record of knowledge and history.
Yeah, that's fair. That's correct.
And then I also want to it's not exactly hopeful, but it's an interesting. I'll use the term grace note for Mrs. Grails.
Nice. A grace note for Grails.
The two-headed peasant woman.
Yes. Tomato salesman.
Tomato sales lady. Who at the end, so she has a vestigial, I guess you can't call it a vestigial head because it's
vestigial
vegetable head. Maybe that's not what I meant to say. She has a second head that it for most of the time we know her does not appear to be functioning in any way. It's just like the second head. And then after the bombs drop, it appears to be the one that survives and has a childlike nature to it.
Almost like a virgin birth.
Yeah. And also, that is more directly communicated by the fact that throughout the time that we've known her, which is just the last chapter, she keeps asking the abbot to baptize the head.
Right. Which the abbot does not do. Yeah.
Which the abbot does not do, but then when she approaches him while he's dying,
buried in the rubble,
he goes to baptize that head, and she backs away, and she has such a childlike innocence. Sort of, there's this indication of like maybe she doesn't need to be baptized, right? And so that grace has come back to Earth is the, I guess, like something of a hint there. Yeah. I mean, it's a real depressing book.
Yes, it is. But also, so we should let's segue to how is this science fiction different from all other science fictions? And honestly, for me, the similarities stand out a lot more than the differences. But I mean, this might have been one of the first books to sort of be a sort of post-apocalyptic novel set far after the apocalypse. I mean, the time span in this book is what, like 2,400 years from like 1960, if you want to do that. And, like this came out around the same time as I believe On the Beach by Neville Shute. So this is sort of like the beginning of sort of, apocalyptic novels. But what's interesting about this one is that I guess the theme is you're just going to see this recur again. Like, as you say, like the basic message is that, that human civilization is a cycle, and we blow ourselves up and then we rebuild ourselves and then we forget what we learned and blow ourselves up again. So the one thing that I think does make it interesting, and this is a weird combination on it, but as you say, this is a depressing book in a lot of ways. And it's also a little funny. Like, there is humor in this book that I was not expecting.
Yes. So let's see. I will say that it is very talky and preachy in the way that the other Obama or Obama books that we have read are. I bet Obama loves this book. That is, I would bet money that Obama has read this and told people he liked it. I don't know if he actually liked it, but he probably told people he liked it. And I got very annoyed by some of the talkiness until the end. And then there's some interior monologues that I underlined parts of. I will attempt to find one here. Yeah, here's some stuff that I like. He talks about sending the ship off. This is Abbot Zerky.
Oh, so this is at the very end. Yeah, Zerky.
Yeah. He's sort of saying to himself, like, oh, what the fuck are we doing sending this out? Like, what's the point of our order surviving or this knowledge surviving? And then he says, hope and not futility is sending the ship. Thou foul seducer. And then he's saying, hope, you foul seducer. But then he goes, but it is hope, or we wouldn't go at all. It isn't hope for earth, but hope for the soul and substance of man somewhere. Which I liked. I liked that. He also makes a point that, as depressing it is, I do think is an accurate observation, although I wonder if you can join me in deciding, I don't know what it means. So he says, the closer men come to perfecting themselves a paradise, the more impatient they seem to become with it, and with themselves as well. They make a garden of pleasure and become progressively more miserable with it as it grows in richness and power and beauty. For then, perhaps, it was easier for them to see that something was missing from the garden, some tree or shrub that would not grow. That's capitalism, Dan. That's what that is. But
well, actually, so let me read a passage back to you. This is from the middle section, and it should be noted. Oh, go ahead.
Can we hold a second to talk a little bit about that passage?
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not entirely joking when I say capitalism, which is the idea that like we have this bounty and then we keep looking for more, and that's what makes us dissatisfied with it rather than simply being able to enjoy it. I don't think we are doomed to that. That is the thing that I would find it accurate. It's an accurate way of describing how civilization can sometimes work, in that we get closer and closer to some Eden, but then find more and more fault with it. But I don't think things have to be that way.
Right. So there's a section. Let me just read this from the middle novella, in which Taddeo is speaking to, I believe, Apollo, who is like the Monsignor of Texarkana. You know, Taddeo asks, "How can a great and wise civilization have destroyed itself so completely?" And Apollo says, "Perhaps by being materially great and materially wise and nothing else." And that is capitalism. Like, I might like capitalism, but that's what, that's, yeah.
And yes, like those are related observations, right? Yeah. Is that we do not appreciate what we have.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, it's funny because I did find some of this was very resonant as far as recovery goes. For me, like there's one of the messages of recovery is that you find hope in your gratitude, like to be in the moment and appreciate what you have in the moment makes you more able to move forward in time. Like with more hope and less pessimism. If you're like, there are things to be joyful about in this moment, and that can give me the emotional space and bandwidth and energy to move forward because I'm not just thinking about the worst, right? Like, and there are things worth saving. And I think it is this, I did appreciate the last novella the most.
Interesting. Yeah, let me put it this way. One thing I want to say is this book, it's often tough for novels, I think, to end. Well, no. Like do you stick the landing? And like it right. Like literally in the form of the last paragraph. And I just want to read the last paragraph because it's really good. This is after like nuclear war has basically happened. A wind came across the ocean, sweeping with it a pall of fine white ash. The ash fell into the sea and into the breakers. The breakers washed dead shrimp ashore with the driftwood. Then they washed up the whiting. The shark swam out to his deepest waters and brooded in the old clean currents. He was very hungry that season. And I don't know, that like whatever I think of this novel, it ends well. And that's good writing. Like that's just, you can see why it works.
I do I must insist that we do Mary Doria's Russell's the Sparrow. Now she wrote the introduction to this book.
Oh, okay.
And at least my edition, she wrote the introduction, and her book is actually and her the Sparrow is about a Catholic mission to another planet.
Oh,
and
okay.
It has a certain amount of bleakness to it, but it raises some questions about faith that resonate with me a little more directly. Do you want to talk about the characters, Dan?
Well, yes, although this for me was the book's biggest weakness. So admittedly, part of the problem is that the novel really is 3 short novellas and it hopscotches. So, it's not like the only character that is a through line is this character called the Wanderer, which I found puzzling, I'm going to confess, because it does seem to be that there is one person who interacts with all 3 of the sort of the protagonists in all 3 stories, which felt like a touch of magical realism. I'm not entirely sure what that was supposed to be. I confess this is where my English literature skills might have failed me. But I do think that the book's biggest weakness is that most of the characters don't really pop from the page. I liked Francis in the first novella, although he's a bit of an idiot. He is a simpleton, would be the way to put it. And I confess, the scholar in me liked Tom Taddeo. That was a sufficient amount of smartassery that I certainly appreciated. But beyond that, I have to say none of the characters really sung to me all that much. But what about you?
I would say that I don't think the characters it's a weakness, but also maybe the way I'd frame it was the biggest missed opportunity. Because I liked some of the characters and found them interesting, and there was enough characterization of them. I was like, I would love to spend more time with these dudes, for the most part. Dudes.
Yeah.
Almost all of them.
They're almost all dudes, with the exception of
except for Mrs. Grails.
Except for Mrs. Grails. Everyone, I think that's the only female character that speaks.
Yeah, the new Eve, not born of man, interestingly enough, might be saying something there, actually. An Eve without sin. I would say I would love to have spent more time with the characters and had less gossiping about New Rome. Some of what it is, I think, supposed to be mordant, Game of Thronesy type machinations are not interesting to me. Like, I found myself skipping over some of that stuff. Like, it did, because it also doesn't really matter for the plot of the book. Like, what happens in New Rome, like they're so distant, and like they wind up doing their own shit anyway. Like they're, I think, basically a Benedictine order. I liked all of the abbots that we got to know and thought they were interesting characters that I could have spent more time with. And also the brother, the inventor, the one that makes the intuitive leap that Thon Tadeus can't make. I liked that contrast, and I would have loved to spend more time with both of them.
I think let me put it this way. Cornhour in particular was a missed opportunity, because in some ways, what's bizarre is that Taddeo, and by extension Miller, makes it clear that what Cornhour did was extraordinary. Like to take something from a page and actually make a working thing from it. Like it's a example of engineering genius, and yet Cornhour as a character barely is there. Like there's nothing to really hold on to. But I agree with you that actually, now that I think about it, the other through line is that there are 3 abbots that we see, in the span of the book. And what's interesting is that they're different personalities, but they're all sort of bureaucratic animals in some way. And that part, now that I think about it, you're right. That part I liked, and it was. I will say, as an academic, there was a strong whiff of, oh, this poor dean, this poor college president. Like that was the thing I kept thinking about as I was reading about him. So I might have had more sympathy with them than I should have. No, go ahead. I just said I might have had more sympathy with them than they actually are sympathetic, because the first one in particular treats Francis horribly, but what is what.
I also found it somewhat frustrating, especially in the middle portion, where there's this jockeying about whether or not a academic institution or this monastic institution should have control over these quote unquote sacred documents. You can do both.
Yeah. True.
There are many fine Jesuit universities, like, and in fact, there is a very strong tradition of monks doing science. And in the book, there's actually a really funny section where Tadeus is like, well, I don't want to offend you by talking about science. And the monks are like, yeah, like,
yeah, we're there for that. That's what do you think we've been doing, bud? Yeah.
Not only you're not offend us, but we might actually know more than you. And in fact, like, he starts talking about evolution, and like one of the monks is like, yeah, we believe in evolution.
Yeah.
Like,
that actually, no, that was legitimately funny, and I did like that discussion. Yeah.
And so why can't you do both is, get you a society that can do both is what I would say there, which we have not as humans successfully done very much, but it does happen. And then I can't remember what I was going to say next, except that I could have done with less Latin and more hanging out with the brothers. I really hated the Latin, Dan. I
mean, I just skipped over the Latin. It wasn't like
I did too.
Yeah.
And then, but you enjoyed the Hebrew, which I confess I did not look up.
It's okay. The key thing to realize about the Hebrew is that the Shema is in there at one point, and that is a sort of pretty important Hebrew prayer. Or Jewish prayer, but there's much less Hebrew than there is Latin. So,
there's so much Latin.
Yeah, there was a lot of Latin. I will say this,
it's so like a convert to like.
Yeah, like that was the thing.
Get excited about Latin.
I was reading this. I was like, damn, this is a Catholic book, and like I will say, as someone who's not Catholic, I got a lot of what was going on, but like some of it was just sort of like the whole difference between a Monsignor and an abbot and like all of that, the Catholic hierarchy makes no sense to me. So,
I got distracted. I have a little kitty. Oh, you can't see him.
No. Sorry, Karen.
Yeah, little Bram.
Okay.
Behind me. All right. Okay, Dan, I think it's time for the thing that will damn us all, ultimately.
Oh, no. Okay. What do you mean? What is it?
It's an ad break, Dan.
Oh, shit. I skipped over that. Sorry, Karen. Hold on. I skipped. Sorry. All right.
Karen, keep this.
No, do not keep this. Come on. Sorry, I skipped over it. All right, hold on. Here we go. All right, time for our ad break.
I do have a question for you, Dan. Besides, how was that accent? Is there IR in this book? Oh, fire away. Dan! I still want to ask you, is there IR?
Anna, one of the benefits of all these years of waiting for the second coming is that while I might not be wiser, I am shrewder. Of course there is IR.
Are you waiting for the Messiah, Dan? Are you waiting for the Messiah? Is that what you're doing?
That's what we're doing. Yeah, that's what Jews do. We're waiting for the second coming. Christians just much less patient. That's the way we always think about it.
I gotta picture. I sometimes picture that as like tapping fingernails on the desk. Like, I don't know. All right.
Today? Nope. All right. Maybe tomorrow. Yep. There are three things that are, sort of the most obvious forms of IR. Actually, I guess four. The first is the question of the nuclear first strike, which is, sort of Leibowitz, the history, the argument that the reason a nuclear war starts is that someone believes they can actually win a nuclear war by launching a first strike. If someone were to ever actually believe that and be in power, that would be a nuclear war that would end all wars. So yeah, that tracks. Another IR thing, as you said, in some ways it's the central thrust of the book, is this cycle of history. The idea that there is no moving down the learning curve for humanity. It is the ultimate realpolitik take. It is the tragedy of realism. The tragedy of realism is that even though we are all aware that we would be better off if we cooperated, fear and a lust for power inevitably cause us to do destructive things. The two, I think, more interesting parts of the IR here is the first is the degree of performativity that goes on in the Abbey. I mean, actually, I think one of the surprises is the degree to which the Abbey succeeds in preserving the memorabilia and actually making it useful, because we actually see their sort of like how they're preserving it, how they're reproducing it. And there's this great quote that I want to read about, what the Brother Librarian believes. And he says, "To Brother Librarian, whose task in life was the preservation of books, The principal reason for the existence of books was that they might be preserved perpetually. Usage was secondary and to be avoided if it threatened longevity. And, the miracle in some ways of the second portion of the second novella is that, yes, these abbots have preserved these documents, even though they have no idea what they're doing. But nonetheless, preserve them enough so that they could actually then be used by people intelligent enough to make heads or tails of them. But the idea that, like, these sort that what are previously thought of as important because they explain things as just important as artifacts is what you see in this book. But perhaps the most interesting thing that's going on in terms of IR is that really what Miller is doing in this book is recreating the international relations of medieval Europe. And no, he is, like, because this is a world in which there are states and they have some power, but they don't have a ton of it. And instead, it is this transnational actor, the Catholic Church, that is incredibly powerful, or that occasionally is powerful and fears the rise of the secular state. And that is a through line that runs through this book, which similar to, you can argue medieval politics, where for the longest time the Catholic Church was the most powerful actor, and it was only with the sort of emergence of true nation states that you see the creation of secular authority as separate from ecclesiastical authority. So that's the IR.
I think I said this before, but it seemed like almost the IR in there that's most interesting to me, or no, I shouldn't say most interesting, but the most IR-y stuff is actually the jockeying, right? Like, I guess that's the medieval Europe part.
Yeah, that's the medieval politics. Yeah.
It is less the international relations,
right,
and more.
Well, it's the way to think about this is that it's an international relations that looks very alien to us because we live in a world in which it's not just that states are the primary actors in world politics, it's that states, and there's a great book by Heinrich Sproit that talks about this, that the state as a political form tends to drive out any other political form that could exist. And so this is, why the sovereign states in Europe over the span of about 3 centuries basically force the church to give up any lay authority they have, which was not the case for the previous millennia prior to that. And so that's in some ways that it's medieval, and you can see like states trying to do things and the church being wary about that. Not that they necessarily want to rule, they're just worried about what the state will do to them. So like it's an interesting jockeying for power.
We don't have great transitions from your bit to my bit, Dan.
We need to do that. We do. But you know what? Let's get to your bit. I've got a question for you, Anna.
Okay. All right, Dan.
Is there a critique of capitalism in this book?
Want to buy some of my tomatoes, Dan? That sounds kind of vulgar, actually.
It sounds dirty. I was going to say, you made that sound dirty, Anna. Yeah. Like that was...
Yeah. So the monks live a pretty cloistered life, separated from the horrors of capitalism, except when it intrudes through nuclear war. I do think it's significant that the bandits who attack or lay upon Brother Francis assume that the illustrated manuscript of Leibowitz's blueprints are what's valuable. That's what has gold on it, right? So the gold must be more valuable, and they don't see the value in the knowledge of the blueprints themselves. They think knowledge is worthless. They're also engaging in wage theft, considering all the labor that went into the manuscript.
It was a labor
and
of
also
love,
stealing IP. Dan, they're stealing IP. And treating a creative endeavor as work for hire. So they also tell Brother Francis, that he can buy it back from them, which is classic rentier, capitalism.
Yeah.
I also think the bit with Mrs. Grails, which is the only kind of explicit, trading that happens on the grounds of the Abbey, is funny because what is happening there is she overcharges the nuns for tomatoes, and then donates her surplus profits to the Abbey's poor box. And that's how charity works in capitalism, Dan. It's like
you rob Peter to give charity to Paul. Okay, got it.
Yeah, like you don't sufficiently pay someone for their labor, or like you cheat somebody out of what is theirs, and then use your profits to like for some more abstract kind of charity. So that is my read on the capitalism in this book. But, you know, Dan, I think a question I thought about more.
Yes.
Is our next topic. So is this canon or is it fodder? Yeah, I know. I feel the same way. Big sigh.
I mean, this is going to be a little provocative, but I think I'm going to kind of go with fodder on this one. I don't know. What do you like? It's not an uninteresting read. Like I get why. I can get why, in particular, during the Cold War, this became such a considered a canonical book. But and live this way, I feel better about this book than I do about Asimov's Foundation, for example, which is not hard. But I don't know. I'm not sure there's enough there. And also, the Catholicism is slightly off-putting to me, I confess. But I don't know. Like, what do you think of?
It's one of those where I can really see why it's considered canon.
Mm-hmm.
I think especially for the time.
Yeah.
It was probably considered pretty bold in its bleakness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, early 60s, we hadn't yet gotten to the cynicism of Vietnam and the obvious strife of poor and Black people in America. So I think sort of America's still riding high on the soda pop fizz of the post-war period. I can see how this very brutal reminder of the cost of nuclear war, and clearly someone shaken by his own participation in what might be considered a war crime, and having taken in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is it. Sometimes when people get knocked out by something, it's considered to be a kind of greatness. But it's funny, when people with my fascination with the movie Civil War, civilwars.substack.com, people ask me is it your favorite movie of all time, or do you think it's the best movie of all time? And I don't know if I do. But it is fascinating.
Yeah.
And I can see that reaction. I don't find this book fascinating, but I could see how it would knock someone out. Civil War knocked me out in that way.
No, this book,
it just connected with me. It hit me in the jaw.
No, this book packs a punch.
Really hard.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's no denying that. That's absolutely true. And I don't know, maybe I'm being unfair to it, because in some ways, partially, the reason why this book is considered canon is because it's the first one, you could argue, to do this sort of far post-apocalyptic, treatment. Go ahead.
And I would say the brutality of its treatment of nuclear war, the bleakness of it is somehow deeper than if you had said just the world gets destroyed. I mean, I think that's a subtlety that maybe I'm only really articulating to myself now, is that when you're oh, the world's destroyed, it's literally an apocalypse, there is no life, and that's what nuclear war does. That's not as hard as, no, people do survive, and it's awful.
No, the scariest thing for me about this book was less the nuclear war than what he described as the simplification. That was extremely well done and well rendered, and entirely.
And I guess it's hard for me to say canon or fodder. It's a book that I can't wholeheartedly recommend.
Yeah.
Because I do think there are big parts of it that I found just excruciatingly boring. But especially if you're a historian, as someone who once studied modern American history, I could see this is a valuable piece of understanding post-war American culture.
Let me ask you this in a slightly different way, Anna. And I think this might be the best way to think about this.
God, you're lagging you got to restart because you're really you lag so much there. I need you to redo that. I'm so sorry. Let's see if it's better. I got your question, but just do it again. And Dan's browser is preventing recording. Ask Dan to refresh the page. Yeah, what's going on?
Okay, now I'm on. Hopefully it's uploading. When this happened last time, it did upload. So
yeah, I think it's going to upload. I'm worried about the fact that we thought we fixed your lag issues, and then we did. All right. But you were asking the question about adaptation, and I think that would be a good place to start again.
All right. Do you want me to start with just re-ask the question? Okay.
Yeah.
Let me put it this way on it. So, this comes out at the same time as Dune, the same time as Foundation, roughly. Actually, it's between the two, I think. Those two have received prestige adaptations. Do you think this merits a prestige adaptation, would be the way I would put it? And if it did, how would you do
it? Yes. I mean,
okay.
Yes. I think that
then I think the answer
great,
is
actually.
Yeah. Though I actually think this is something where the original thing is flawed, which means the adaptation can actually improve upon it, is the way I would think about it.
Yeah, I think that a good Apple TV adaptation by Ron Moore.
Oh, that's good. Good. Yeah. He's walked away from For All Mankind, right? This would be good for him.
Yeah, I think if it could be beautiful, shot in the desert, I think some of the Game of Thrones stuff could be made more intelligible and interesting, especially if you're seeing it, because when it's on the page, this was my problem with actual Game of Thrones too. The political machinations on the page are really hard to make interesting, although George R.R. Martin had more success than a lot of people do. I think this would make a great Roland D. Moore Apple TV adaptation. They could streamline it a whole lot. I guess would it be 3 seasons?
It would absolutely be 3 seasons. Yeah. That would be the way I would do it. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that means it's canon. It's again, I wouldn't recommend it to just anyone, but I do think that it can self-select. If you are interested again in post-war American history, I think that this book illuminates a certain kind of thinking that has continued to be a through line in American popular culture to this day.
Yeah. And in some ways is more resonant than ever, unfortunately. But yes.
I want to say one thing about the spirituality of it. That part that I read about hope is, to me, this thing that feels closest to my own feelings about salvation. Which is that salvation is hope. That salvation isn't about I don't want to save your soul, Dan. That I'm not that kind of Christian.
You've already expressed your opinion about my soul, but no, sir, go ahead.
Well, I'm not I don't believe that you gotta profess the belief in Christ to that believe that to be quote unquote saved, because I think of salvation as something that actually happens on this earth. Salvation is to reborn into a new life that is a life of giving, a life of not sacrifice in a martyr sense, but sacrifice in the sense of doing more for others than you do for yourself. And by doing that, you become part of a community and a greater part, more than just yourself. And I think that there is a little bit of that in this, a little bit in acknowledging that hope in a quote unquote next life isn't literally after you die, but it's hope for another kind of life and for living on in the hearts and beliefs of others. So
that's a lovely grace note, Anna.
Oh, thank you. And I don't even have 2 heads that I know of. So
wait, speaking of which, that's the debris, right? Yeah, that's nuclear.
Lots of debris. It's on the cover. There's debris flying on the cover and buzzards.
So it's the debris field. This is when we talk about the things that we have not gotten to in the rest of the recording of the podcast. Anna, do you have a lot, or what do you got?
No, I don't have tons. Books, it's kind of hard to have a lot. But I did have one thing we haven't said yet, which is I don't know if I really believe it would take 2,400 years to build back up into spaceflight. I don't know if that lag sounds right to me. 600 years between all of this stuff.
Oh, I don't know. That actually struck me as about right, because it's not just space travel. It's the idea that there's colonization, space travel beyond.
That feels like a long time. It feels like a real long time. Although
I mean, 600 years.
Okay. So what I was thinking of is that the abbey that got bombed, this formative event, Monte Cassino, is that?
Yeah.
What? Yeah. That was 560. Like 1,000 years later is the A bomb, or is the less than 1,000 years later is Hiroshima. What, 1,000? No, you're right. Sorry. Yes, that's 1,500.
Did you get 1950 and 1,500 confused, Anna?
I did. All right, my math is off, and so therefore it's totally right. Yep. You know what, Dan? I do. You know something about me? I reverse numbers all the time. So
I understand.
Yes.
Let me say
something. So maybe that's exactly right. So my debris field, like my one big debris field thing, is not even. Oh, but to rebuild, that's actually was my bigger point.
Okay.
Like, to get back, would it really take that long to get back to? No.
I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Anyway,
let's put it this way. I don't want to find out. I would hope that we don't have to deal with that.
Good point. What do you got, Dan?
This is a small thing, but like, am I incorrect, or in the first novella, the abbot works out a way? Essentially, they develop large language models. Like, there's a quote where they're like trying to deal with like books where like something is burned out, and he says, he's worked out a mathematical method for finding the missing words. And I kept thinking, oh my God, they've invented large language models. But, not the most important thing.
That feels like code breaking more than large language model. Like,
well, the two are more linked than you would think.
Related. It's a related idea.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But not quite maybe that advanced.
Yeah. But let me read one passage which I particularly liked from the first novella, which is describing what the U.S. continental economy looked like. The principal industries of the continent, excepting a few seacoast regions, were hunting, farming, fighting, and witchcraft. The last being the most promising industry for any youth with a choice of careers and having in mind as primary ends maximum wealth and prestige.
I also want to read a section. Yeah, it's funny because I was looking at like the critical acclaim, and a couple of them are side-slittingly funny or whatever, sense of humor, and I didn't laugh that much, but I'm glad that it amused you. But there is a great scene in the last part of the last novella where the abbot is trying to convince the veteran of space travel who's become a monk,
right,
to take on the mantle of, I think, abbot and of the new colony, and also captain of the ship.
Yes.
And the guy's like, I don't know. He keeps on saying, I don't know. And there is this, their whole dialogue, I think, is actually pretty funny, but also really moving.
Yeah.
So he says, I don't know what I want to, I don't know. He's like, I don't know. And the abbot says, so he says, I'm scared. I'm scared, Reverend Father. And the abbot says, steel screams when it's forged. It gasps when it's quenched. It creaks when it goes under a load. I think even steel is scared, son. Taken half an hour to think? A drink of water, a drink of wind? Totter off a while. If it makes you seasick, then prudently vomit. If it makes you terrified, scream. If it makes you anything, pray. But come into the church before Mass and tell us what a monk is made of. The order is fissioning, and part of us goes into space, goes forever. Are you called to be a shepherd, or are you not? Go and decide.
Pretty good.
I liked that. Some of the it was funny. Like, I didn't really love this until that last novella, where I felt like some of the writing finally started to hit me.
Right. This is a small thing. As you know, this novel is heavy on the Catholicism.
you mentioned, yes,
but there is some Judaism, which I did like. There's the wanderer looking at the books and saying, "Ha, still writing things backwards." I see, which is a joke because in Hebrew you go from right to left rather than left to right. And then easily the most Jewish line in the entire book is towards the end when the abbot says, well, at least nothing worse has happened yet. And that which was actually funny. Also, by the way, you were laughing. what I can only describe as the abbot trying to get IT support to help him with the thing was actually pretty funny, and in some ways pretty like on point with like what would happen in the future. So like that actually might have been the most trenchant, like, you know, predictive stuff in the book.
And there is also a moment in that exchange where he like damns the machine, and I think one of the other brothers is like, well, does it have a soul? And then there's like this really brief aside about, well, like, you know, does it, like, we've decided animals have soul. Like it's a nice little, you know, it's a nice kind of Catholic, you know, it's very Catholic, but also appropriate to the time. I don't really have anything else. I think
nope, that's it for me as well.
Book that I did not particularly enjoy reading. It does spark a lot of conversation. I guess that's another point in favor of canon. But we are going to close our conversation about it. If you are interested in other things that Dan and I have to say, well, actually, it's another good place to remind you can become a patron. I will say, so I posted our little emergency podcast about Biden dropping out, and someone became a patron like within minutes and joined the Discord.
Wow. Okay. That's amazing.
So we may do more emergency podcasts in this run up to the election, since things have gotten very exciting, and we'll make those free.
Yes,
but
we will.
with the hope that it will bring people on board for more conversation. To become a patron, you can go to patreon.com/spacethenation. Dan, I will say we had 2 people drop out last week, and I was like, it was my office, wasn't it? That was.
Oh no, it's not. Your office is wonderful.
Okay, but
they're just heathens.
Oh, okay. No, it was like me talking about my office. Although I was just so excited. I was just so excited, Dan.
You should be excited. Don't apologize.
But you know what? People leave. It's also, you know, like times are tough. Inflation.
Yep.
Like I know sometimes people. I am sometimes like with subscriptions, even if it's like a few dollars a month. I'm like, I don't know. Anyway, $3 a month. Become a patron. Dan, where else can people follow what we have to say?
I have a Substack. It's called Dresner's World. I talk a lot about world politics. I'm going to be talking a lot about American politics for the next couple months, because that's really the most important IR story as well. So, yeah. Anna, what about yourself? I think you were on Instagram.
I'm on Instagram. I also have a Substack called civilwars.substack.com. It is sort of about the movie Civil War, which again, I just got the DVD, so I'm going to start actually doing a scene by scene analysis. But also, it is about everything, because there's a lot of Civil War. In fact, I was at a 12-step meeting the other day, and apparently Young wrote a essay, or as part of a book called The Civil War Inside Us. So maybe I'll cover that. And we are both on Blue Sky, which is, I think, our primary place of doing politics.
Their primary social media platform. Yes.
Yeah. And it's okay for now.
I hope Jamel Bowie comes back.
I hope so. Adam Seward hasn't left.
Oh, good.
So there is that. And then we have this podcast. And until next time,
keep this channel open for more.
Good job.